They're here.
It's a lot of you. Oh, I get so engrossed and forget what time it is. Particularly when I'm working on my own at night. Oh, it can be so exciting being in the glass houses then. Sealed off from the dark night outside in a gently humming TARDIS. There's never enough time.
I'm her lab assistant. I do what she says.
If only. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Nice to see you all. We're going to start by showing you some images and asking you what you make of them. Tristan, are you ready, please? Right. What do we see here? Tulips. Lovely.
One yellow one.
One yellow one. Yes, one little yellow one by itself.
Next image, please, Tristan. What about this? What do you notice here?
Fascinating it is.
It's come from the... Absolutely. This one has come from the same type of bulb as the other two, but it's produced a throwback. It looks like you've cut two flowers in half, put them together.
Very, very
Yes.
fascinating.
Next image, please, Tristan. This is magnified 1,000 times. What's happening? Pollen. Absolutely. This is the moment when the pollen is coming out for the first time. Dehissing, we call it. Tristan. Why have you put that in? You didn't have to do that.
Actually, yes I did. Does anybody know what Huntington's disease is?
Yes.
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 What is it about?
Dominant gene inherited defect.
Yes. It's a fatal neurodegenerative disease. And in this image, we can see that this orange centre shows us the faulty gene, the mutant.
Next image, Tristan, please.
What do we see here?
Not a man.
One man. One woman.
Thank you.
The fantastic Becky Saunders. So what do all these images have in common so far? The odd one out. Anomalies, the exception and the norm. And that's what interests us. All the time we are looking for patterns and for disturbances in those patterns. Dissonances, mutants. The next one please, Tristan. Though it might not be so easy to see what's unusual here.
I expect you can tell me who's in here. Sorry? Well, absolutely, yes. Now, this, of course, as I'm sure most of you know, is William Bateson, the first director of the Horticultural Institute, originally at Merton outside London and now here in Norwich. And the photographs around him are most of, though not all, of the scientists who were working with him around 1910.
Can we look at the other one please, Tristan? This was Becky Saunders, and we know that she is surrounded by a group of men, and it was also around the same time. And this was a very typical photograph of scientists at that time. And can we go back to Bateson again? And now we notice there's lots of women. Yes. And that's what interested us.
How come Bateson was surrounded by all these women?
But before we talk about them, I'd like to tell you a bit about me.
This could take a while. I'm going to get ready.
Hello, my name is Addie. And when I was 16 and taking my GCSEs, a very extraordinary thing happened. It was the 4th of July, 1998, yes. It was Independence Day in America, which was very appropriate when I thought about it afterwards. I had taken my biology exam in the morning and come home early. Strange being home during term time. Parents out working, no brothers and sisters, no one guarding the biscuit tin. I put on the telly, hoping for a really rubbishy film.
It felt a bit like a foretaste of heaven, being clothed not in white robes, but black gowns.
I saw this huge procession of old ladies. Some in wheelchairs, some with walking sticks or helping each other along, all white-haired, walking down King's Parade in Cambridge in black academic gowns. I had never seen so many old ladies together, chatting and laughing. 900 of them, it turned out.
Police outriders zooming through red lights, people waving and clapping and taking photographs. For us, a group of elderly women, most of whom did not know how to put a gown on properly, being applauded. It was so unexpected. I felt charged, wonderfully alive.
Some of them had this look on their face. I couldn't quite describe it. Amazement. Yes, they were in a state of amazement. It was so weird. I kept the programme on to see what was going on. Turned out, these were the women who went to Cambridge University, studied all the same courses as the men, took all the same exams, but were never granted degrees. Only in 1948, 30 years after women were given the right to vote in the United Kingdom, did any woman get a full degree at Cambridge, and with it the right to wear the academic gown.
We felt like successful marathon runners, running rather slowly into history. I was amazed at how much I was feeling. I didn't recognise myself in a way. Well, really? Overcome.
They interviewed some of them, and they talked about what fun they had had at Cambridge, even though they were made to sit at the back of lectures, and were disregarded completely by some lecturers. Only one woman seemed to be at all angry. I remember her sitting on the grass with a friend, 89. She was wearing a bright pink jumper with matching socks and a wild black and white hat and waistcoat.
I came here for an apology. We paid our money, we took the same courses, we sat the exams, and we did not get a degree. And still, no one has apologised.
I felt outraged. She had come all the way from New Zealand. I thought of all those ladies who didn't live long enough to get their invitation, or who were too sick to come. I think watching that programme really changed my life. It made me much more determined. You see, I always wanted to study science at university, but my parents weren't too sure about it. They might have supported me being a doctor. Oh yeah, they could see the value in that. Yeah, my dad's a doctor, and he really loves it. But all I knew is I didn't want to sit there day after day handing out prescriptions. But I wasn't sure what I did want to do. All I knew is I loved watching programmes about gross diseases. Yeah? And when the close-ups would come, and everyone in my family, including my dad, would look away and say, ugh, I was really into it. Name me one famous woman scientist, my dad would say. I'd get pretty stuck after Marie Curie and Rosalind Franklin. You see, he would say. Can you name any more female scientists?
Dorothy Hodgkin.
What was she famous for?
Structure of insulin.
There you go. Any more?
Kathleen Lonsdale,
Good.
What was she famous for?
physicist. She was, I don't know what branch of physics, but she was a crystallographer.
What?
Structure of benzene.
Oh, what was her name again?
Kathleen Lonsdale.
Kathleen Lonsdale. There's a name for you. Kathleen Lonsdale.
She also was out of prison in the Second World War in Hollywood Prison in London because she was a Quaker Catholic. She wouldn't take part in the scientific war effort. She was put into Holloway Prison. She caused more problems there, Mark.
There's another play. We digress. Anyway, anyone else? One more. We're doing well. One more.
Miriam Rothschild.
What was she famous for?
Entomology.
Entomology.
And let's have Barbara McClintock, the only woman to win the Nobel Prize solo.
You see, I was one of a handful of girls going to study chemistry, and the only girl planning to do physics at A-level. My dad wasn't happy with that. Oh no, he was pretty traditional. He didn't like the idea of his daughter studying in an all-male class. And actually, I didn't like the idea all that much either, because most of my friends were girls, and they wouldn't be there, except in biology. For some reason, lots of girls took that.
So, when you were at school, what was it like? Were more boys than girls studying science? Would you say?
Yeah.
I'm getting nods. Yes. Was it the same in all the subjects, or if you took biology, would it look different?
Yeah.
Yes, it would look different. That's what pupils are saying to us now, still. But they're still saying that in physics and chemistry, well, not so much chemistry, but physics, the girls are quite underrepresented still. You know.
Well, it all seemed like rather hard work, and not much fun. And I wasn't sure if it was worth it. And then I saw those ladies, and I thought, right, mind your backs. Coming through, one female scientist! Mind you, being stroppy is not enough.
And she is stroppy.
Hey, watch it.
See what I mean?
You have to love it too. In fact, that's more important. So I became a biologist, a molecular biologist to be precise. I study how plants grow and how best to feed the world. I'm in the large world of fields and exploding population and climate change, and in the small world of electron microscopes, micropipettes and genes. It's like crashing through glass doors in a science fiction movie, going through layer after layer, opening doors and finding they open into hundreds more, massive and minute, complex and simple. A world in which you must be prepared to be wrong, over and over again. It's not like school science, where you have to get it right, where you're just repeating what has been done before. In fact, being wrong in my job can almost be as exciting as being right.
Not always.
All right, not always, but you never know. You know, you might find something no one has discovered before, and you know you might. You know, it's funny. I never thought that I would end up studying plants. I didn't, Joe. They always seemed really dull. I thought I'd do something more dramatic sounding, like cancer research. We went on this, well, I had to study plant biology as part of my course at university and go on a field trip, and that's what did it. Who's been to Mallorca? Did you see the plants? Did you see plants in Mallorca? I couldn't believe some of the places those plants were growing, clinging to the sides of cliffs, battered with sea spray, survivors in a hostile environment. And we had this tutor. She was mad, but she was so enthusiastic. I mean, we laughed at her, but we liked her. She was always herring off up, we always had one, haven't we? She was always herring off up scree slopes to take us to look at plants. And now I'm always dragging my friends to come and look at some little plant, and they're like, yeah, okay, Addie. Yeah, that's great. And I don't care.
I like plants because they stay in the same place. Bit of a control freak, I suppose. Besides, I'm squeamish. Have you ever done a dissection? You have.
What have you dissected? Pardon?
A rabbit. Yeah, well,
What about bull's eye?
it's not for me. It's not for me. I had a close encounter with a swordfish once. It had worms.
Oh. And I had to dissect a crab. It was alive. Yeah, and yeah, I know, you can squirm. The instructions said I had to boil it first. I did. Oh, I had to. Not nice.
Come on, let's get on. There's not
Yeah,
much
I
time.
know that. I'm going to tell them.
That's up to you.
Yeah, I've got to.
I wouldn't, but it's your choice.
Yes, it is, and it's my body too. Right now, my biological clock is ticking rather loudly. And I don't mean babies, though I suppose they come into it too. Now, this is more like a genetic time bomb. My mum has just been diagnosed with Huntington's disease. pretty unlucky, as it's really rare in Asian families, 1 in a million, and she has it. And that means that I might have it. 50-50 chance. You don't usually get the symptoms until you are in your 30s. She got them quite late. She's 55, and it's incurable. I suddenly know more than I want to about this particular gene, the Huntington gene. It affects your body movements, your mood, and your mental abilities. Only 5% of people who know it is in their families take the test to see if they've inherited it. And I decided I had to. You know, it's my future, my work, my hopes for a family. And, you know, it is hard. They made me have counselling before they let me take the test. But they told me that the results would come today. And so that's why I'm telling you, because if this phone rings, I've got to answer it. You know, in case.
The librarian.
Yes, the librarian. Okay. I was in the library at work one day, reading a journal, when the librarian comes over.
You're working with Snapdragons, aren't you?
You're not doing her like that.
Oh, all right. You're working with Snapdragons, aren't you?
Yes, amongst other things.
You know you're working with a lot of the same plants as Bateson's ladies.
Who?
Bateson's ladies. You've heard of William Bateson.
William Bateson, 1861 to 1926. If you work in genetics, you can't avoid him. The man who helped drag Mendel the monk out of obscurity. Mendel the monk. Mean anything to you? Who was it?
Sweet peas.
Please, yes. An Austrian monk who spent a large part of his life crossbreeding peas and recording the results. He's in all the standard textbooks. Bateson championed the rediscovery of his work in 1900 and coined the word genetics. Mr. Bateson.
We are working at the growing edge of knowledge.
He's also in all the textbooks. But Bateson's ladies, who are they? Definitely not in any textbooks. And did I really want to know about William's private life? So what if he was a ladies' man?
They worked with him. Most of his team were women.
So I got curious. Who were they all, these monochrome women? And what did they do all day, apart from wear weird hats and stand among the flowers and play croquet? All that Alice in Wonderland stuff. Ah, she definitely worked in a lab. Did she wear a flower every day in the lab? I don't think so.
Meticulous charts.
Beautiful drawings.
Charming and crucial. Colour and flower perfected. Scientifically accurate. Crucial because in a time before colour photography, they were the only visual record.
Notes.
In 1912, a single plant was noticed in a patch of Linum grandiflorum sown in our border of annuals. It was remarkable as having a blue flower and procumbent habit.
A low ground-hugging plant.
Whereas Linum grandiflorum has a deep crimson flower and an upright habit.
So what if one flower is blue? Anomalies reveal secrets. Sometimes in my job, I'll be walking up and down a huge field for several days, looking for plants that are different in some way, searching for clues. Once I worked out that I walked 25 kilometres up and down the rows of barley. It took me 2 days, keeping my eyes and my mind open. I found 15 mutants. Result.
Measurements.
Reports.
Papers.
Submissions to the Royal Society. Brief biographies, single sides of A4. 10 live in 4 boxes. The women are not there. Their voices, their colours, all gone, no scent. Familiar disappearances, unnatural selection. It is hard to inherit much from them.
20 large volumes of correspondence from William Bateson. And a biography by his widow, Beatrice.
He is beginning to irritate me, cock of the walk with his harem of willing women, working for him for nominal pay and uncertain conditions, gathering up the crumbs beneath his table. Alice Elizabeth Gardner. 1873 to 1954.
I have just heard from Mrs. Green that Ida Sutton is now engaged to be married. The complaint seems to be catching at Merton. As it looks as if you would lose 2 students in the spring, I am writing to ask if you would have any use for me. I'm afraid I'm not a very brilliant person, and as I am 45, perhaps you would rather have someone younger. But I am very keen about the work, and as you know, have had some practice in it. I am getting 20 shillings a week here, and of course feel it is only right one should be paid for work done. But I should not make any difficulty over amount of salary. I've always hoped to get back to the work, and even if you do not see your way to putting me on your staff, I hope someday you will help me start a line of research again. With kind regards to Mrs. Bateson. Believe me, yours very sincerely, Alice E. Gardner.
She worked for him for 18 years. Try getting a research job with a letter like that now. No chance. But why did the ladies come and why did they stay? Joe, get changed.
What into?
The brown lab coat.
I
May
get all the best costumes.
1897, the Senate met in the Senate House in Cambridge, which is the governing body of the university. The Senate was being asked to grant a grace to allow women to receive the title of BA on completing their tripos and so gain the right to wear the academic gown. No women could be present. Their voice was only heard through written submission. A more unjust, a more revolutionary, a more destructive and evil proposal than that I cannot conceive. We cannot turn a woman into a man. The old story, the passion of women for putting themselves in exactly the same position as men. I have not only no sympathy with that, but a positive aversion from it. Women are physically weaker than men. I will merely mention the fact that their nerves are more likely to break down under the strain, and that physical evils are likely to result. Oh, I think that is a fact. At any rate, it is my belief.
To test the reaction of anthocyanins, it is suggested that the following flowers be used as plant material. Brown wallflower, Cheiranthus chieri, scarlet peony, Paeonia officinalis, violet, Viola odorata, magenta snapdragon, Antirrhinum majus.
Plant Biochemistry by Muriel Weldell, the first book on the subject, cutting-edge science in 1920.
Filter off some of the alcoholic extract. Note the colour. Add a little alkali. Note the change in colour. Large, full-bedded jars with glass stoppers high in the chemist's shop window. Bright, still oceans. Red, blue, yellow. Stepping inside the chemist's shop, the world coloured red, blue, yellow. Red sky, blue trees, yellow faces walking by, swelling and contracting and swirling away. Large, full-bellied jars, bright, secret oceans, never opened. I wanted to open those jars. I was 7 years old. I knew then I wanted to be a chemist.
This is a man's university, a training ground for men. We need a woman's university to educate the women who are going to be the mothers of the future generations.
Why is this flower magenta and this flower cream? We need to know why we get magenta flowers when we cross them. What is controlling the colour? off the rest of the alcoholic extract to dryness, and you will note that the anthocyanin colour returns.
The colour returns. If either of your parents had brown eyes, you could have blue or brown eyes. Because we know now that brown eyes have another layer of pigment over the blue. But if both your parents are blue-eyed, you will not have brown eyes. And if the number of repeats on my Huntington gene is under 28, I will not have the illness. 28 to 35 repeats, unaffected. 36 to 40 could be affected. And over 40, full penetrance, a mutation, no escape. It's a numbers game. They found out about the illness around the time of Mendel in 1872. It showed the same inheritance pattern he uncovered in peas. And my brothers and sisters, we are all in the same pod. 50-50 chance. But they won't take the test.
Addie,
You don't care, do you?
it's not that. It's just I don't believe in washing my dirty linen in public.
Dirty linen?
Some things are private.
No, I totally disagree. Nothing is private. My story is your story.
You don't know my story.
Yeah, that's because you won't share it with me.
We understand our opponent's views. We know very well that there is quite a different feeling in the matter altogether, and that what our opponents mean is opposition to women being here altogether. Will those gentlemen who said "hear, hear" be good enough to put that expression of opinion into print and send it through the Senate? If we could only get the views that we have had expressed in private, expressed in public, we should then know how to deal with them.
And the other side too?
And the other side too. I have never made any secret of my own view. I am in favour of what is called mixed education. Co-education in school and university has to come. I have no doubt. We cannot stop where we are, nor shall we go back.
Sorry. It's nothing. Just my mum. She's worrying too. It's hard for her, and hard for my dad. Sometimes she's her old self, and other times she just gets really low. She drops things. She's had a few falls. They didn't isolate the actual gene until 1993. But those shadowy women around Bateson began this work. They started to isolate the elements in plants. I better answer her.
In May 1897, they voted in Cambridge on whether to grant women degrees. All BAs were qualified to vote. Special trains were laid on from London to bring the graduates back. Accommodation and meals were provided in college for those voting against the motion. There were so many people attempting to vote that they had to use the windows as well as the doors in order to keep proceedings moving. Mannequins of women were suspended above the crowd, and every time someone voted in favour, they were booed and jeered. Finally, the vote was announced. Those in favour of granting women degrees, 138. Those against, 1,083. We are saved! Saved! They shouted. Saved from what? Flour was thrown, rockets let off, and wood torn down from the surrounding area to make a huge bonfire in the market square. Later that night, some 200 students stormed the back gates of Newnham, my college. They rattled the inner bronze gates, demanding access. Only with some difficulty were they turned away, leaving behind them one of the decapitated mannequins and smashing more windows. After that, many more lecturers claimed that it was not suitable for women to attend their lectures, and it became almost impossible for women to use the laboratories. Addie?
Oh, listen, I'm just going to phone Ben. I can't bear this waiting.
Look, do you want to go out and take a short break?
No, it's okay. I just call him quickly.
Right, Tristan, next image, please. That's her, Muriel Weldon.
Ben, have you checked them out?
It's the only picture we've got.
Nothing. Are you sure?
Rather fuzzy, taken from a group
Try
photograph.
not to
in
skip
Newman.
word secretary. I can't. I'm working. I'm not meant to be phoning you. Please. Muriel Weldon, later known as Mrs. Hewer Onslow, 1880 to 1932. A short life ended by illness.
We don't know what it was.
She had a young PhD student working under her in a chemistry department at Cambridge called Rose Scott Moncrief, 1903 to 1991. Mrs. Onslow was my supervisor in Cambridge and at the John Innes. She was the first person to apply biochemistry to the problem of heredity in plants. And she was a brilliant mimic, a bit like you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
She could be quite a snapdragon herself.
A bit like you.
We were a little in awe of her, but we liked her, very private. She married another scientist, the Honourable Hewer Onslow. He had become paralysed as a result of an accident diving into a lake in the Alps, and never left his house in Sidgwick Avenue, where he had created a laboratory with equipment assembled so that he could work at it from his bed. And none of us ever met him, but we knew the story. He was supposedly very handsome. And after he died in 1922, she wrote his biography. I read it, hoping to find out more about her, but she had erased herself. Not even a trace of her quiet, sharp humour. So much was just not said in those days. We did not make a fuss. She supported my work in her scrupulous way. We were immersed in colour. The colour of petals. Snapdragon petals. It paid off. I treasure the vivid recollection of receiving my long-coveted PhD certificate from the hands of Mrs. Onslow's red-headed, 15-year-old lab boy in stained overalls on his round of errands. It had the flavour of being knighted on the battlefield.
Rose Scott Moncrief left the battlefield in 1937, but not until she had isolated anthocyanin for the first time. She became Mrs. Mears and went to India with her engineer husband. She worked hard in the guiding movement and raised a family. She never returned to science.
She never returned to science.
Well,
An update from 3. Delete. A 3D optical projection tomography image of the Snapdragon, please, Tristan. We are still grappling with Snapdragons, but we can look at them in quite different ways. This image shows us the internal structure without even having to dissect the plant.
there were snapdragons in my mother's garden. Magenta snapdragons. I used to spend hours crouched beside them, pinching the flower between finger and thumb, opening and closing the flowers of the snapdragon, looking into that soft mouth with its tongue of yellow stamens, closing it on my finger, smeared with pollen. How came later. Why came even later. The why questions are always harder.
Back to Mrs. Hewer Onslow, alias Muriel Weldon. She may have been quiet, but she was no wallflower. She remained a practicing scientist all her life. She worked for Bateson, valued his advice and support, but always kept her own scientific goals in view. He never quite got her into his harem. She thought outside the box. She knew she had to go beyond the measuring and observing of variation in petals, beyond the meticulous counting and recording. She knew it before Bateson, so she went to work with other people like Professor Gowland Hopkins, the chemistry professor in Cambridge. She wanted to understand what was happening at a cellular level, diving down below the surface, just as we now work deeper still at a molecular and genetic level. Bateson's letters to her are supportive and respectful of her work. He offers advice. He does not dictate.
Testimonial from Miss Muriel Whelldale. I formed a very high opinion of Miss Whelldale's powers as an investigator. The subject proved by no means an easy one, and the series of results which the experiments provided were unexpectedly intricate. She succeeded in unraveling these complexities for herself. I may say that in my experience of this kind of work, she is one of the few who have shown themselves thoroughly capable of independent research. As an artist in colour, she has extraordinary skill. If she leaves us, her loss will be a serious one, for she is the only person I know who can reproduce the colours of flowers in such a way as to be an exact record. William Bateson.
She died in 1932 at just 52. You will find her name in the National Dictionary of Biographies alongside Becky Saunders. I think if she had lived longer, you would have found it in your textbooks.
Do you like patterns? Anyone? What kind of patterns? What kind of patterns? What? Who arranges their pens in particular order? Anyone? Yeah. Do you? It's really annoying. Yeah, I'm as annoying as she is. I like to arrange my pens in a particular order. White, black, brown, purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, pink, red. It's always a bit disturbing, that jump from green to yellow. A bit sudden. Patterns visible to the naked eye, to the hand lens, to the microscope, to the mind, to the imagination. So those women were working at the surface of the leaf, observing acutely with their eyes and their hand lens and their microscope, and they realised that factors they could not name or see were causing changes. And some they could predict, and others they could not because of the limit of what they knew. And they eventually learnt about the chromosome. Now we have the electron microscope, and we are working at the subatomic level. What is it we cannot see or even imagine now?
What do you think?
Perfect. Caroline Palou. 1884 to 1963.
Delightful music, isn't it? Caroline Palou, thank you for coming. I was Mr. Bateson's right-hand man. I was one of the first people to come and work with him at the Institute. I had a degree from Reading, not the same as an Oxbridge degree, of course. I went with Mr. Bateson to the theatre and concerts and on scientific trips abroad. Beatrice usually stayed at home with the 3 boys. Not everyone can wear a hat well, can he? He could. Magnificent. I love them too. I know what you're thinking. I was his right-hand man. Beatrice and I were very close. She understood. I ran one of his laboratories. We called it the ladies' lab, but some men worked with us too. Counting peas, wrinkly ones and smooth ones, green ones and yellow ones, hundreds of peas, thousands. We made up pea limericks and jokes about chromosomes. We wrote stories about ourselves set in ancient Greece. I suppose sometimes we did feel as though we were perched on Mount Olympus, surveying the scientific world below. Hubris, perhaps, but so intoxicating.
Terrible plays. I read them. Palou as Hera and Bateson as Zeus. I think they were meant to be funny, yeah, but they weren't. Not to me, anyway. That they had to make their own entertainment, no TV.
Croquet in summer, chess in winter, and the dinner parties. My dear. Whenever we had distinguished visitors, some of them were entertained with the Batesons and others dined with me. We met afterwards in the library for port and cigars. It was civilized.
Not like our canteen.
He coined the word genetics, you know. He loved forging new words. He was original, a rebel. The scientific establishment did not approve, of course. In the end, the younger men came along and they thought he was old-fashioned. They had their own ideas. Survival of the fittest. He offered to resign a few months before he died. I'm glad to say they did not accept. It was hard living on, seeing his ideas displaced. I must admit, I cried. Sounds strange, doesn't it?
Not to me, Caroline.
It mattered to him, the truth, more than wealth, more than fame. I worked for him all of my working life. He mattered to me, but not more than the truth. He was looking for a key to unlock one of life's mysteries. None of the new ideas would have emerged without the groundwork of Mr. Bateson and all those blasted peas we counted.
Beatrice Bateson.
Hang on!
Beatrice Bateson. Date of birth unknown. Died 1941.
William Bateson, my husband. Almost not. When he came to ask for my parents' permission to marry me, they suspected he was slightly drunk. Refused to allow an engagement. Quite rich, considering Papa was an alcoholic. Perhaps that was why. A few years later, I placed an article in the London Illustrated News, which I was sure William would read. He did. And to cut a short story even shorter, we were married in 1896. Rather romantic, I suppose. William's activity was unflagging. Everywhere he stumbled over questions. He never knew where he had put his pipe or his scalpel. He had an obliviously eccentric dress sense, apart from his beloved hats. But ask him about any of the experiments which he was directly involved with or in which he took an interest, and he could tell you precisely, absolutely precisely. In the early days, when we lived in Grantchester, most of William's experiments were conducted in our garden. There were hundreds of flowers to care for and pollinate, seeds to gather and count, eggs to turn in our incubators. Our spare rooms were our hatcheries, boxes instead of bedsteads, and our laboratories, the kitchen and the outhouses. I kept all the records, rows and rows of numbers.
You don't need complex equipment or training. You just need space and time and to be methodical and efficient.
He would be amazed to see one of our labs now.
One day a year we went away together, just the two of us. We went to the Royal Horticultural Society show in London and visited galleries and libraries. The rest of the year, one of us had to be at home, usually me. William went abroad, lecturing. I was methodical and efficient. I was all of those things until our third son was born, and then William had to find other help. You will not find my name on any papers, like some of the other ladies. But I know what I did. So did he. So did they. Brilliance has to be coupled with diligence. It suited me. We lived together through momentous times. Perhaps sometimes we fail to notice. Surely all of our everyday moments, cleaning our teeth or paying the milkman's bill, are intersecting with great changes.
Ice caps which have existed for tens of thousands of years are crumbling. Thousands of people are being displaced. We are living history.
We are the current expression of a genetic pattern which has existed since before our ancestors learned to walk upright. We carry the future.
Why hasn't Ben rung?
When Darwin published The Origin of Species, people had to grapple with a world that was not made in 7 days and try to embrace the idea of having apes in the family. For some people, that was the end of meaning. For us, it was the beginning.
And they were fighting the war to end all wars. Their eldest son, John, died near Passchendaele in 1918, 14 days before the armistice was signed.
Every day, selecting and nurturing, counting and analysing. And all the time, our young men falling against the wire, rotting in trenches. After the war ended, our second son died.
Suicide.
We believed that the arts and science could rise above such viciousness, could bring the world into one new whole. William refused to write scientific propaganda for the Ministry of Information. The world he saw through his microscope was larger than that.
So what is Beatrice doing here? She wasn't a scientist. In fact, she had no formal scientific training whatsoever, which is true of many of the women who came to work for Bateson. They were essential to his work, as were so many others few books have mentioned. Breeders and growers all over the country, working on rabbits and moths, birds and mice and plants. Beatrice was a lab assistant. No scientific department could manage without them. They are the bedrock.
What do you want?
I mean it!
I'm gonna get changed.
Nora Barlow, 1885 to 1989.
Give me a chance. Anyway, how come I've got to play about... Yeah, mind that plant. How come I've got to play about 7 different women and you get to be you?
Because I'm very good at delegating. Now, come on!
William Bateson. Well, of course I was going to be interested in the man who championed the cause of women's degrees with my uncle, Francis Darwin, and studied genetics. Lots of the scientists wanted to hold on to the creation story in the Bible. They said my grandfather, Charles Darwin, had gone too far.
And lots of people today would agree with them. Creationism. I can't get my head around it.
Bateson embraced Darwin.
My mind boils with evolution.
It wasn't just the ideas. It was the way he put them over. Charismatic.
Whatever difficulties may be in store for those who cast in their lot with us, they need fear no disillusionment or misgiving that their labour has been wasted on a paltry quest. Mendel's clue has shown the way into a realm of nature which for surprising novelty and adventure is hard to be excelled, leading us into a new world, the very existence of which was never previously suspected. Agnosticism is the very life and mainspring of science. One of the great lessons science has to offer is the resolute rejection of authority.
Nonetheless, we called them his Bible classes. We were undoubtedly his converts.
We are working at the growing edge of knowledge. We must be continuous, we must be broad. We are working in the larger whole. The fate of nations hangs literally on the issue of contemporary experiments in the laboratory.
Music to our young ears. We were needed. We were being recruited for an adventure. We women could not find many openings. We were happy to risk the uncertainty for the possibility of working in science. Many of us had private incomes, and so we were able to partly fund ourselves, and William encouraged us to work wherever we could find the opportunity, at the John Innes itself, or in our allotments or gardens. Most of my own work was done in a corner of the vegetable patch at home. I've always been most myself outside in the open. The sight of rows of plants hooded in muslin bags was a common one. Did you know that if you break off the spur at the back of an aquiligia, you get the most delicious drop of honey sweetness, irresistible? I showed my little daughter Hilda. She showed her younger brother Horace. They were very thorough. Every single spur broken off. Months of work ruined. 6 children, one of whom had considerable difficulties, meant that I was never really able to work full time. And I undertook the time-consuming and absorbing task of organising my grandfather's papers, the Darwin papers. Piles of them on the table in the sitting room, hastily covered with an Indian cloth whenever guests came, and they often did, were colleagues of my husband's family. But I never ceased thinking like a scientist. I remember taking Horace to a meeting of the Genetical Society once. He was really very, very young. They had a microscope, and each of us lined up in turn saw a chromosome for the first time. He has never forgotten it. I believe that all of my children, even my grandchildren, are filled with an excitement about the world, which is to me the natural state of being, a belief in the possibility of finding answers. A belief that finding answers matters.
Finding questions is just as important.
Quite right. I have a flower named after me, you know, for all the work I did on my grandfather's papers. An aquiligia, a granny's bonnet. Rather a fussy little flower. And pink, never my favourite colour. But nonetheless, an acknowledgement. And it colonises easily, rather a promiscuous type. Within 2 years, you have a riot of varieties, a genetic firework display. I've always loved large families.
It's been 25. Smiley face. Thank you. I'll be home early. I love you. 25. Normal. Yes!
Now come on, you can't go home yet, we haven't finished yet.
I'm just going to tell my mum.
Oh, of course. Tristan, next image please. Becky Saunders, 1865 to 1945. Now, there's a woman who had plenty of time. Unlike me. My career. I was born in 1865. I went up to Cambridge in 1884. I entered one of the 2 women's colleges, Newnham. I studied botany. I attended those lectures where women were allowed to be present. We sat at the back, we sat at the front, we sat in the gallery, we sat where we were told to sit and apart from the men. I worked on practicals in laboratories when and where I could. not borrow books from the university library, neither could our women lecturers. There were no professors. If we wanted to read a book from the library, we had to ask a male associate to get it for us. I completed my courses, I sat the examinations, I passed. The women's colleges, Girton and Newnham, paid for and opened the Balfour Lab for women students. Female graduates like myself and Muriel Welldale gave tuition, along with those few male lecturers that supported the venture. Bateson was such a one, Francis Darwin another. It was hard work. The facilities were inadequate, but we felt we were penetrating into a new world. Without the Balfour, many women would not have been able to complete their courses.
Becky Saunders graduated in 1891. She received a first-class pass. She did not receive a degree or the right to call herself a BA or wear an academic gown. She received the Distinguished Banksian Medal in 1906 from the Royal Society. She was the only female president of a section of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, and she continued to ask permission from her male colleagues to borrow books from the university library.
But there were no rules on the ice. The world made new, uncolonised. When the water froze on the flood meadows, I was the first one out there, skating beside the River Cam, sweeping out and across, etching the ice with circles and curves, my skates sharp and fearless, skates like scalpels, marking the surface, mapping my territory, skating on thin ice. Blue light on the ice, white mist shrouding the pollarded willows, pink shades in the sky, pale wintry sun, and on the ice, an orange, a small, bright sun, and I on the tips of my skates orbiting the orange, a perfect circle, precise and perfect, round and round. The only one to do it. No one to touch me. No one to stop me. Sheer exhilaration!
Becky Saunders died in 1945. She was knocked off her bicycle. She was 80 years old. She had described 249 botanical families, making meticulous notes on each. She probably studied more plant material than any other living botanist at the time. When she died, all her notes and slides were destroyed. Nothing remains. No wonder we haven't heard of her. It's all beginning to sound a bit like Henry VIII's wives. You know, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Each woman disappearing in her own way. Marriage and children, death, obscurity, or being turned into a flower. I want more than that. I don't want to be remembered as a flower. I want to be remembered as a scientist. I want to pass on an inheritance. Someone needs to know how plants grow to ensure food security in the future. Someone needs to throw away half of what has been done and start again. And someone needs to work out what the next question is. And that someone could be you. Or me. And it's not easy. And I don't mean just the science. But it's worth it. And I want children. Not 6 like Nora Barlow. 2 would be enough. But even that's risky. If you want to succeed in science, I mean. My mum keeps asking me when. And for her now, it needs to be soon.
There aren't all that many women in our department with children. Well, there aren't all that many women, and very few of them have children. It's perilous stepping off the ladder. You've got to keep publishing
Yes,
papers.
yes, I know,
You've got
I
to
know.
get your results out first to
But
get the grants.
some women manage it. You know, luckily, Ben's a writer. He works from home. His work is more flexible than mine. We've been talking about how it might work. Now we can talk some more.
If you look at the statistics, they're not encouraging. Lots of female undergraduates and PhD students, even postdocs, a few, getting less. Lots of lab assistants, but there aren't many female team leaders.
What would science look like if half the scientists were women? The same? Different? I would like to find out.